All right, welcome back to Open Line. We're joined by our guest, Dr. Thomas Schwartz from Vanderbilt University, but we do have a caller on the line. Let's go ahead and get to James. James, this is Olivia. You're live on Open Line. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Hello?
Hi, James. Can you hear us?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, go ahead. You're live on Open Line.
Yes, ma'am. It's not really a question or a comment. It's more of a request.
Go ahead.
It's more of a holiday thing, you know, with all the turmoil going on in the world, you know, today. And, you know, and I don't know if you remember, it's for all of us 50-something-year-olds that we grew up watching Channel 5. You know, I don't know, you know, of course, the iconic, the two kids, you know, pulling the sleigh, looking in the candy store and the toy store. You know, I grew up watching that.
Yeah, I know a lot of us loved it.
Yeah, we all love that. And, you know, there was another one that you always showed when I was growing up. It was, I don't know, maybe 70s, early 80s.
Uh-huh.
It was a promo that you always showed of, it was just Christmas pictures, and it had the horns going, and it showed all the different languages of the different countries saying, I'm guessing, saying Merry Christmas. And at the end of it, it showed, I'm thinking it was a state building. It said, you know, peace on earth. They would turn out the lights on the state building where it spelled out peace on earth.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that would be awesome if, you know, y'all would start showing that again.
Yeah. Well, hey, James, we appreciate your viewership and we appreciate your call. I know that our Chris Davis actually did a story about that commercial and the history of the commercial. If you go to newschannel5.com, you can find his story. But we are going to air more stories about things like that towards the holidays. So thank you so much, James. Appreciate your call. All right, well, we're going to pick up where we left off. I know everyone remembers those commercials. They go down in history. Yeah. But we're going to get back to our original topic of conversation. We left off talking about the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I was telling you before we started the show today, I actually did a story about inflation and how it's affecting our Thanksgiving table. And I was talking to a gentleman from the Farm Bureau who was telling me, you know, part of the reason that you might see higher priced turkeys this year actually goes all the way back to the situation in Ukraine and the war with Russia. Your take on that, does that not surprise you?
Well, it doesn't surprise me in the sense that there have been so many ripple effects from the war in Ukraine. We've largely been spared. The worst, I mean, the whole question of a lot of Ukraine's wheat goes to North Africa, goes to regions where it really is, it's the main source for nutrition for people. And in that sense, there's been real concern about hunger and very deep shortages in some parts of the world which are more dependent on Ukrainian wheat. But because these markets are global, the price of wheat going up also affects us, and so it has an indirect effect. But we've largely been spared that effect. The more direct effect on us had been more in the price of oil and the price of gasoline. But food prices have gone way up in some parts of the world, have faced real shortages and hunger.
Yeah, and things you don't even think about. I know I did a story earlier in the year, fertilizer.
Yes.
Apparently, Russia and Ukraine are producers of fertilizer, which of course our farmers right here in Tennessee use, and higher priced fertilizer trickles all the way down to the consumer.
Yes, absolutely. And that's again, these are sort of ripple effects from the war and the disruptions that it's created.
Yeah. All right, well, we've got a caller on the line. I'm going to let Melanie join us. Melanie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. I have a question. This war, of course, is affecting everybody in the world. And the way that we've been sending money and all of the equipment over there, I don't understand why NATO and America, with all of the powers that would be put together, why we don't go in and really enforce Ukraine and get this war over with. Because to me, we're just dragging our feet, and it is costly to us, and it is affecting the world. And if somebody says that Biden doesn't want to get in this war with Putin, we are in this war. So, again, I don't understand, with all the powers that NATO and America have combined, why it isn't used to just go ahead and put an end to this, which I believe we could. Thank you, and I'll listen for your comment.
Thank you, Melanie. Appreciate it.
Well, this is where you get into the worries about escalation. If the United States or other NATO countries sent troops into Ukraine, the argument would be that this would open up their territories to possible Russian attacks. So if Poland sent in Polish forces, if Germany sent in forces, that would open up the possibility that the war would go beyond Ukraine into the rest of Europe. That opens up the question of whether you have you could have a nuclear exchange. The problem is that on the one hand, the United States and NATO feel that Ukraine is fighting their war, that they are fighting for principles and issues that NATO stands for. On the other hand, NATO does not want the war to become a third world war or something greater, and certainly doesn't, and most populations of these countries also don't want their forces directly involved. And what has been interesting in this is because the Ukrainians have been so effective and so relatively united in a way that no one really expected, or at least very few people expected Ukraine to really respond with as much unity and courage as the Ukrainians have. Because of that, there has not been this idea that we have to intervene. There's been a willingness to let the Ukrainians fight, and that they're showing that capacity. But certainly the caller's right. I mean, if the idea could be that the NATO and other countries could enter in to try to end the war. The problem is the fear that intervention would lead to, in fact, a greater war and an escalated war.
It almost seems like Pandora's box. Once you've opened it, it's going to be hard to close it.
It's very hard to close it, and the danger, of course, is that escalation always carries the risk of the use of nuclear weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, I want to get to that, but we have Wilma on the line. Let's go ahead and welcome her to the conversation. Wilma, you're live on OpenLine.
Yeah, Dr. Schwartz, I have kind of a similar kind of question, and it's about why can't we stop this? Now, I don't know how to pronounce this man's name correctly, but it kind of rhymes with I'm a dinner jacket. The former, I guess, Prime Minister of Iran.
Ahmadinejad, yes.
Yeah, okay, all right. Now, when he got a little stupid, they froze in Belgium. The international banking community froze Iran's assets, boom, just like that. When this started, I'm like, why can't they freeze these assets of Russia? Now, we know how much is being skimmed off the Russian people into the pockets of the oligarchs over there. Maybe that wouldn't affect them, but they start collecting assets. I couldn't understand why they didn't do the same thing to Russia when he was brutal and invaded a country, as opposed to the guy in Iran that didn't even invade anybody. He was just threatening nuclear weapons, I think it was, or threatening to build a nuclear weapon or something along those lines. So why can't the Belgium Finance Center do the same thing right now and just nip this sucker in the bud? I'm going to hang up and take your response offline.
Okay.
Thanks, Wilma.
Well, I mean, the simplest answer to what is a complicated question of how you deal with this is Russia is just too big to be shut down in that manner. Iran, Ahmadinejad was a bit of a loose cannon. His threats, in fact, his threats actually didn't really stop Iran from continuing to build a nuclear weapon and to continue in its program. So even though some of his more outrageous actions were stilled by some of the international reaction, Iran has continued its own path in a destructive way. Russia is just too big. And Russia is also more self-contained than Iran, even than Iran, and that in many respects it has the natural resources and other things to be able to stand the type of sanctions. And the fact is, while the Western world is united against Russia, the Europeans and Americans, a lot of the rest of the world is not united against Russia. India buys its oil, China buys its oil, so there is not the type of unity that would be necessary to really impose that type of financial straitjacket on Russia that could have a real effect. That's simply not there. A lot of countries don't see this as their fight, and they in fact have been more than happy to pick up with Putin as they need to.
Yeah. Well, obviously a great conversation that we're having, but we have to quickly throw to a commercial break. We'll be back with Dr. Thomas Schwartz after this.